All right, hello everyone, and welcome to a discussion about mental health in fantasy. And we're going to delve into all kinds of forms of mental health and mental distress, such as PTSD and other forms of mental illness and whatnot. And appropriately with me is the psychiatrist, Dr. Erik Goodwyn, who is also the author of King of the Forgotten Darkness, a book that I just read and loved. And this is a book that really we're going to talk about a lot of different fantasies as we do around here. A lot of different stories. We're going to talk about probably Malazan and First Law and Lord of the Rings and Realm of the Elderlings and so many others. But this is almost a poster child for portrayals of mental health, and PTSD is a big part of this, but there are other things that you portray in here, Erik. And so it was a real insightful read for me in that sense. Like, okay, how do you go about portraying mental illness appropriately in a story like this? And what can fantasy bring to portrayals of mental states, of mental health and mental disorders as a genre? What can fantasy do there? So this is a discussion we're going to have, and I'm so excited for it. So, Erik, thank you for being here.
Glad to be back.
All right, all right. Yes, and there will be a link to Erik's channel, the Imaginarium, in the description. But Erik has been a guest on the channel a couple times already, and I'm always happy to chat with you. So, Erik, let me just start with a kind of a question that occurred to me. Why in King of the Forgotten Darkness did you decide to give us a protagonist who is obviously suffering from a major form of PTSD? And this is not a spoiler. This is a something on the back of the book. But your main character Liam has essentially escaped from his world that he grew up in called Arantir. It's a fantasy type world with lots of magic and perils and some really bad stuff going on. He has escaped into a much more modern world, mid-world, where everything is technology and everything seems to be nice and smooth and easy, right? So, why did you decide to give us a central character who's so wounded and obviously, was this something you just basically said to yourself as a psychiatrist? I'm gonna write a tortured character here, and I'm gonna explore the inner workings of him psychologically.
Well, that's a great question. There's multiple things that I'm trying to do here. The first thing is that this is part of a series of stories, three trilogies that I've been working on for decades. And so Liam is one of the major players in the entire series, but I needed to kick it off properly with someone who has their own arc and their own story to go through in just this first story. So, so I'm doing that. I'm establishing the two worlds as well as a major element of the series as a whole, the Raven's Tale series. And a big part of it is an exploration. So all of the Raven's Tale has an underlying theme of the exploration between basically safety and suffering. And how do we
Mhm.
approach these things? This is something I encounter all the time. This is something every person has to deal with at some point in their life. And even civilizations have to grapple with this concept.
Yeah.
But but Liam is doing this on a personal level, very, very personal, because he's faced basically his entire family getting wiped out and right in front of him as a child. So the trauma is cranked up to 11, as it were.
Yeah.
But then he manages to escape all of that into Midworld, the modern, in a near future AI saturated kind of world. And I do want to say that a lot of the AI saturated stuff I thought of years ago, and
Yeah.
only now we're starting to see a
Now
whole
we're
lot of
starting
it.
to resemble it more.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't think we would get there so quickly.
Yeah, life is definitely imitating art here. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's an early part at which there's a whole lot of like AI generated music being played in the background, and I came up with that, in the 90s.
Wow.
And here we are, and like, okay, here we are. All right. But I was gonna say, but that is woven into his journey. Now, I've talked about this a little bit with Peel Stewart on some videos that we've chatted about, and how this is a portal fantasy.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges of any type of portal fantasy is what happens when you go through the portal. And as a writer, you have to figure out how to keep the momentum going after that happens, because once that wears off, it's very easy for the plot to go sideways, and you're gonna like, what? Okay, now what? This is great. So you imagine if Dorothy was transported to Oz and then they just sort of sat down and looked around and thought, wow, this is really cool. No, she's immediately got to do something and move on. So I thought the way introducing a character like this to who has been in both worlds already at the start helps to move things along and tie things together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
So,
really interesting to me that you have these two worlds because the surface level suggestion is that Arantir is like hell. It's horrible. It's a place where people suffer, where there are evil magic users, and there are basically all kinds of scary creatures. It's a very dangerous place. You don't want to go there, right? You want to escape from there, like Liam did. But there's a subtle indication, I think, in the story that Midworld is not as perfect as it seems, right? That you have a character named Damien who is a kind of a villain character in here, but he's a powerful person in Midworld. But he also, like Liam, has a connection to Arantir of a sort. He's been in both worlds, in other words. Most people have not. So he's kind of the architect in many ways of this perfect world, this sterile world, this, as you say, this AI world where people don't have challenges. It's like the whole goal was to make life easy for everybody. And
yeah, isn't that the goal?
it looks to me like everybody is depressed and everybody's on drugs because they're depressed. So what gives? What are you trying to say by giving us this split between a world where we have magic and peril and danger, and we have a world where everything is easy and perfect, but people are depressed? And you, as a psychiatrist, I was especially curious because you have these people in Midworld who are constantly resorting to a drug. I forget what you call it. What was the drug called?
Or in all.
Oronol. Yes, that's the brand of choice, it seems, at the time. And they're essentially drugged out all the time in order to numb themselves. Am I onto something here? Are you trying to say something about the need for not just challenging aspects of life, but maybe even suffering? Do we need suffering in order to be alive, Eric? Is that kind of where we're going here?
That is the question I pose with this story.
Yeah.
And I'm not done talking about it at the end, but I do have quite a bit to say about it in this book. And it would be one of the things about storytelling is that, of course, you use images and emotions to convey a sometimes things that are ineffable within us, like feelings and impressions. And that's what I'm trying to do here with this series. Now, you you point out that a lot of the characters in Midworld are using this drug that is freely dispensable by the government to
Yeah.
anyone anytime they want. And there's even now a long-acting injectable form available. Yeah. And so if you want now this is an extension of a thought experiment that I've done in many of my lectures. I've given lectures to various groups because I'm pretty deep in academically into Jungian psychology, or analytical psychology is another name for it. And so this is the kind of thing that people talk where they're talking about like archetypes and the collective unconscious and all that kind of stuff. And
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty involved in that world. And a lot of times when I give a lecture, I pose a thought experiment, and that is in the first couple of chapters. And it's basically, it runs like this. If you think about the worst loss that you've ever had in your life,
Hmm.
and you Yes, the loss was very painful, and that person meant a whole lot to you, and so forth and so on. Well, what happens if psychiatry gets so advanced that you can take a pill that will eliminate the pain of that loss? Would you take it? And of all the years I've been giving lectures, I've had one person say yes, and everyone else says no. Well,
Hmm.
isn't that strange? I thought the whole point of psychiatry and psychology was to eliminate suffering, right?
Huh. Huh.
Or is it? So, if people will choose not to get rid of the pain, then there must be something else that's even more important than pain or pleasure.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at here. And I think that the quick, like some verbal summary of it, you could say that what people really seek out more than the avoidance of pain is meaning. Like and many poets have spoken of this, and that you can mitigate pain with meaning, but the only thing that mitigates meaninglessness is meaning. You can't do anything else with it.
Mm.
So that's at the beginning of the question I pose and the beginning of how I approach this. Now, if if you want, you can read King of Forgotten Darkness as a straightforward portal fantasy adventure, and I tried to make it work very well on that level.
Sure.
But the other layers are there if you're interested, and you can kind of ponder them and like explore like what is he really doing here. What I think is funny is that even though I don't hide the fact that I'm a psychiatrist, which means I prescribe medications all the time.
Yeah.
And yet,
Ironic, given
isn't that funny that I would include that? And you're the first person to notice that and ask that question. I've been sitting here waiting this whole time for someone to bring that up. Like, you get the prize. You notice that curiosity, and
Yeah.
what's up with that?
You're not trying to put yourself out of a job, in other words. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no. Now, I think it is theoretically possible to come up with something like Orenol that basically just eliminates pain and suffering.
Uh-huh. But would we want that?
But then, I mean, that's the question I'm asking before it happens
Yeah.
is that really what we want? Is that really our goal? I remember I was in the military as well. I was a psychiatrist in the Air Force for 7 years. And I remember when I was in the early part of my training, one of the attendings brought that up. He was also a military psychiatrist, and he said, when it comes to PTSD, we're trying to help people, alleviate that suffering. But on a certain level, he was saying, but shouldn't going to other places and shooting people and blowing them up, shouldn't that cause some kind of disturbance in the soul? And if we completely eliminate that, what are we even doing? And I was like, wow,
Right.
that's a pretty wild take for a military psychiatrist to take, but it
But
made me
he's
think. It really
he's
made me think.
right. Yeah. It's an important question that he's
Yeah,
asking. Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm sure that you would agree that, you're not being anti-medication here. I'm sure you found that medication has helped many of your patients, and so on and so on. But
Oh, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But
So,
there's a cultural dimension to this, and that was another piece of creating the two worlds, is I
uh,
wanted to point out in visual terms um, how our approach to culture makes a difference when it comes to mental illness as well,
hmm.
right? And so it's biopsychosocial. That's all the components. You could add spiritual to that as well. And those are all the players here. So it's not just a matter of medications, it's a matter of all of those things interacting. And I tried to depict that in more symbolic terms, but it's all
Yeah.
there.
I mean, it's really there in a brilliant way. And in fact, when we talk about fantasy in general, it's hard to think of a fantasy where there isn't trauma, right?
Yeah.
But there are some, I'm sure, that you've read over the years that you feel like are either they handle it well or they handle it in an interesting way or something of that nature. So we'll talk some more about King of the Forgotten Darkness in a bit. But what are some of the fantasies where you would consider okay, this author is doing something interesting here with mental health, with trauma, with PTSD. Obviously, this author has thought about the psychology behind this. What would be some examples that would just spontaneously spring to your mind?
Well, one of the first ones that comes to mind would be Abercrombie's First Law trilogy.
First Law, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know of any characters in there that aren't traumatized on some level, you know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. Now, I think his background is in psychology, so it didn't surprise me that he was able to, to weave that into his story. And in some ways, it's quite different from the way that I do it.
Yeah.
His is more in terms of behavior and like thought patterns and things like that. And I have that in mind, but I also try to use the symbols of the narrative itself and the magic system, and everything's all woven into the psychology of it. But I really love the way Abercrombie did it too. And like Glocta, he put he was put through horrible traumas,
Yeah.
which is evident from this first chapter, so there's no
Yeah,
spoiler.
that's not a spoiler. The guy's been tortured into a husk of what he formerly was,
Yeah.
literally tortured
Hmm.
as a war prisoner,
Yeah.
and
For years.
yeah, for a long time, and lost a lot of his, not just physically, but just who he was, because so
Hmm.
much of who he was dependent on his being a dashing soldier and all of that, and it
Hmm.
it really changed his personality in a big way, didn't it? What he went through, that
Yeah.
kind of trauma does, doesn't it? You don't come out of that the same person.
Right. Right. And many of the characters in that series as a whole, I think Abercrombie is showing us this is what happens when it doesn't work out well. And in a sort of a tragic kind of way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
kind of like Hamlet is the same kind of thing. Like if you're a character flaw, if you don't figure it out, everything goes to hell, you know.
yeah,
So
in a big way.
yeah, in a big way,
So an example I'd like to throw in, and one that I think you'll be able to talk about because you've recently finished Toll the Hounds in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And to me, I don't think I've ever read a more compelling portrayal of the intertwining of grief and love than what you get in Toll the Hounds. But there's obviously, in Malazan period. There's just a lot of trauma, a lot of PTSD. You have soldiers constantly being portrayed, and he leaned a lot on the Vietnam War
yeah.
uh, authors and so on to do these portrayals. So I feel like there's a Erickson is just a brilliant writer. But I feel, do you agree when I say I feel like his portrayal of trauma and mental health is has some real weight to it?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's you can tell, just kind of I don't know how much experience he has had with military folks, but Malazan feels very modern in terms of the type of war that's done. I guess it's in a fantasy setting with swords and crossbows and all that, but the way that people think of war and the kind of weary cynicism and just the grueling, brutal nature of it is very modern, actually.
Mhm.
If you've read some like accounts of like say Froze's Chronicles talking about the Hundred Years' War, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Right? The attitude towards war was pretty different back then. Like people recognized the brutality of it and the weariness of it. Yes, yes, yes. But their attitude was so different from the way moderns look at warfare. There's a whole lot of jadedness and cynicism and weariness of warfare. And I think that Erickson really captured that. And so there's a lot of layers going on in the Malazan series. Like he's talking about these individual characters, but he's also commenting on war itself in the modern world, much like Tolkien did with his story. As I know he would disagree with me saying allegorical, but it is
Yeah.
kind of allegorical, right? And the
Well,
way that
talking, yeah, it took a very different approach,
yeah,
and
did.
as someone who actually experienced quite a lot of trauma in his personal
Mhm.
life,
Yeah,
losing so many of his close friends in World War One, and going through as a soldier and having trench fever and everything else, and also losing his well, he was a little young to even remember his father, but he lost his mother when he was 11, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that you feel like that comes out in symbolic ways, maybe
Oh,
in his writing.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And when I just not too long ago I finished Toll the Hounds. That's as far as I've gotten so far in the series. Pretty deep into it. I think it's
Yeah.
book 8 or something.
Yeah.
And I realized there was something different about this one than the others,
Yeah.
and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I'm like, man, he's going through something here. He's processing something with the story because
Yeah.
so many of the characters are so anguished and philosophical, and like almost all of them are. And even when the ones that didn't make much sense that they would be that way, but they are in this story. And I found out later that that he lost his father, not long before he started working on that book, I believe.
Yep. That's correct. Yeah.
And so and I was like, there it is. That's what it is. And you could see that and feel it very much in the story.
Yeah.
So in that case, it's not so much depiction of trauma in the story itself, it's the storytelling, which is the processing of the trauma.
Uh-huh.
And in King of the Forgotten Darkness, I do both of those things. I try to do both of those things,
Yeah.
showing not only how does the person process and actually get through to the other side,
Right.
if such a thing is even possible, but the story itself is in a way the answer to
Yeah.
how that can go,
Yeah.
and
Interesting.
ways that it doesn't go, right? Because there's different examples.
And
Yeah.
so much of that emerges as a matter of its impact on the relationships that the character has.
Hmm.
So in the case of King of the Forgotten Darkness, you have Liam, but you also have Mia. And very early on, this is not really a spoiler at all, but Mia and Liam had been a couple at one time. And they couldn't remain a couple because of that trauma and its weight on them and what they couldn't say to each other.
Yeah.
They had too much. It just wasn't working, though they cared deeply for each other. You know, that is something I'm sure you've seen again and again, where
Right.
trauma, undigested trauma, interferes with a relationship.
Yeah.
Is that that's what you were going for, I assume, when you were with Liam and Mia?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the key to that is the undigested part of it.
Yeah, yeah,
And how in one world that is encouraged to keep it undigested because it's easier and
right.
it's not as painful, and you can just, you know, forget about it and don't worry about it.
But it
And
doesn't go away, does it?
no, it doesn't. No. But and there's a couple of ways, and I think that I've seen uh, much of our storytelling is about personal trauma and mental illness and all of these sorts of things. Like the stories, before I've always said, before there were psychiatrists and psychologists, there were storytellers.
Yeah,
Stories are the main way that we do the digesting and the processing.
yeah,
Folk tales in particular are really powerful when you recognize this, and they're crafted by many generations of oral storytelling, and so they get pared down to their absolute essence. And so when you start to see that, and you see that, say, Hansel and Gretel is a story about dealing with parental abandonment. Parental abandonment is not unique to any one culture. It's been around since as long as there's been humans, and
yeah,
probably way before that. And so, yes, on the surface, it's a silly story about witches and gingerbread houses and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at it the way that you would look at a dream, it starts really making a whole lot more sense. And you're going, oh
yeah,
my gosh, this story is Cinderella, right? Childhood maltreatment from parental figures. Same thing. So, I mean, I could do that all day, but the point is that many of our stories do this. They try to attack these universal things, but when it comes to trauma in particular, it gets kind of sticky because I think people recognize when someone has some serious trauma issues going on. What I think I see less commonly is the way in which people can heal from it. They either just sort of get better suddenly, or it goes on and on and on forever and ever and ever and never gets any better. And neither of those is really right at all.
right.
And so I tried to, now, not getting too deep into the details of it, because it's a fantasy, right? You can see that it's a slow, difficult process, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least there can
Hmm.
be. Now, not
Hmm.
not everybody sees that, and a lot of it has to do with the choices that they make along the way.
Yeah.
And even if the choice is I am not going to deal with this thing that is ultimately out of my control, I accept my fate.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the choice.
So this reminds me a lot of essays written by Stephen Donaldson on epic fantasy, which I think I might have talked about before with you. But
Yeah, Johnny
essentially,
Wirtz brought him up too.
okay, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
They're brilliant essays, and I do think that he makes some really great insights about how epic fantasy can restore a sense of meaning to readers as they participate vicariously in this highly symbolic, dreamlike journey. And you
absolutely.
mentioned how stories can function like dreams as a way of processing things. Um, and once you do that, you can repair relationships, can't you? I mean, there are so many, and again, this is where I feel like reading a story like Realm of the Elderlings, for example, by Robin Hobb. There's so much trauma in Realm of the Elderlings. I mean,
Yeah.
she puts her main character Fitz through the ringer
Oh yeah. Through
over and
the meat
over.
grinder.
The meat grinder and other characters too, like Althea Vestrit, for example, suffers
Hmm.
terribly in the live ship traders and so on. But you can also see because we get a sense of a life lived with some of these characters that when the characters do confront their trauma, when they participate in a journey that involves the confrontation of their trauma, that this helps with the relationships. This
Hmm.
helps in the repairing of a relationship. The understanding emerges between the characters who were butting heads earlier because there was that trauma that was not dealt with that was interfering before.
Yeah.
So you see it again and again with Fitz and the Fool and so many other characters who
Right.
they love each other, but they clash
Hmm.
because of this trauma that is simply not dealt with yet. And they
Hmm.
have to get through it in order to repair the relationship. And I think you do that really well in here.
Mm.
It's a central aspect of this because Liam's not alone here. He has relationships that he's forming, and he's got a lot of losses that he's trying to process, and that is interfering with his current relationships, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's how it manifests. And now, not only do you see that in the so-called real world, but as a writer, you want to do that with your characters, that whatever their flaw is, that it needs to impact other people, or else it's
Yeah.
just a solipsistic kind of thing in their head, and they don't. It's not as impactful and powerful as it can be. So that's a key piece of this, and it's
Yeah.
just because we are absolutely social animals, and that is a key element of the fiber of who we are as a species. So it matters, and despite the fact that in the modern world everything is very hyper individualized, and there's communities are very loosely in, if at all, defined, which is very different from the way that we've evolved on the planet. There's a lot of talk about this in psychiatry nowadays about the mismatch between modern society and the way that people function compared to the evolutionary, environment in which we evolved, which was very communal, very social, very tribal. There was lots of close knit. And I think we come into this world with that kind of Stone Age brain, expecting that, and we don't get it. And, here we are. So I also have a lot to say about that too in this story and in the
Yeah.
series as a whole, of how these two worlds couldn't be more different from each other.
Yeah. And that's excellent. And not always do relationships get repaired. Oftentimes, you'll see relationships that fall apart, like in The Wars of Light and Shadow by Johnny Wirtz. You have
Oh, yes.
two brothers, half brothers, who essentially, there's major trauma between them. Um,
Yeah.
they because I mean it's the wars of light and shadow. There's this conflict between light and shadow,
Yeah.
between Lysair and Erathon,
Yeah.
and a lot of that is due to the trauma that each of them has gone through, particularly poor Erathon. I'm always rooting for Erathon, um,
Yeah.
but you see what I mean? Like sometimes the story forms around the failed relationship, and that oftentimes that failure is due to the unaddressed trauma.
Well, yes, and the cultural elements that put these two people on the chessboard in the positions that they're in, like completely things that out of their control.
Yep.
That's one of the things I really loved about the Curse of the Mist Wraith. And I'm still kind of chewing on like what is the Mist Wraith really?
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
like what is she symbolizing with that? Because I know it's something, but I can't put it into words, which might be the
Yeah.
point. She's brilliant, so I'm sure she's thought about that.
Yeah.
I'll have to
Oh, I
ask.
mean that's a psychologist or a psychiatrist's playground right there.
Yeah,
Something on that
yeah,
can function on that level for
hmm
sure. Yeah,
yeah.
but
But I mean,
that's a
this
read and
place.
find out thing too.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, just the way that she brings in the Council of Wizards and how they're a big part in the things that don't go well.
yeah, yeah,
So without revealing too much about what that is all about, but yeah, I agree that there's all that trauma in there and the tragedy that happens when these people lock into these modes of thinking and they're understandable.
yeah, yeah. So, do you agree with Donaldson then that following a character vicariously through a journey of confronting their trauma and coming out of that with healthier relationships. You could take so many examples. Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
Is a kid who has to deal with a lot of trauma, makes friends as he deals with that trauma. And then dealing with the trauma helps him to make those friends. The same could be said for Harry, another Harry, Harry Dresden and the Dresden Files, is dealing with huge trauma from his childhood and subsequently as well. But a lot of it is about working through that and working through that in order to arrive at healthier relationships with the people around him, with the people that he loves.
Hmm.
You could see it in, the Stormlight Archive with, famously everybody talks about Kaladin when they talk
Sure.
about mental health and
Mhm.
PTSD, or Tenar in the Wizard of Earthsea books,
Yeah.
in the Tombs of Atuan. You have a character like Tenar. Is following these characters through their journey, is it actually therapeutic for a reader? Does it help you? Do I finish that book, put it down, and does that help me to process my own trauma as a psychiatrist? What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. Like I was saying before, I think the art of storytelling is so old because of this very thing, in that we have the ability to put ourselves into other people's shoes. That's called theory of mind. It evolves, well, it develops in everyone as toddlers. So anywhere from 3, 4, 5 years old is when people develop this ability to see the world through someone else's eyes,
Hmm.
right? And especially with more modern writing, which is very much about making sure you immerse the reader into the POV character's experience, whether it's first person or third person or whatever it is you're doing. Focus on the sensory details, get them out of their head and into the feeling and into the body. I mean, these are hypnotic techniques. Like we could talk about that at some point, like
Wow.
how writers nowadays are essentially using hypnosis on the readers. But it really brings you into that character's experience. And so, in a way, like you said, you vicariously process trauma that way. And if something has happened to the main character, even if it's extreme or cranked up to 11, like say Superman, his entire planet blows up, right? That's
Yeah.
a pretty big trauma. But you can go through that story and go, well, that guy went through something way worse than I ever did. Maybe there's hope for me, and that's part of what it is. It's about fostering a sense of hope, which in itself is healing. But it does more than that too, because it represents and displays what you're dealing with in vivid, concrete, visual spatial terms, which is easier to understand rather
Hmm.
than like just endless verbiage. Right? If we could just if the brain could just produce a verbal report of my current status, it would just do that and present it to consciousness and go, here's how you're doing right now.
Right.
But that would be too long and too full of, sidebars and nuances and everything else. The brain needs something quick. And so when you're dreaming, it constructs a visual spatial narrative, an as if narrative. It's like my
Ah,
life is proceeding as if, boom, this dream. And that's what we do every night. That's what the brain is doing. So every brain is a fantasy novel, or every dream is a fantasy novel. Every brain is a fantasy author
ah,
in a
ah.
way.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and so when we read fantasy, that's basically what we're doing. We're dipping into the dream logic, and a lot of authors talk about that, like the dream logic of fantasy.
Right. Right.
And the weakness of fantasy is that anything is possible, but that's also the strength.
Yeah.
Right. So if you make it to where, and you could talk about this in like the magic system discussion, the soft magic system will work if it resonates with emotional truths.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what dreams are doing. They're saying your life is as if this, and what a fantasy story can do is like if you experience this bad thing, well, it's as if, you know, you have a choice of going into the trauma and facing it head on or staying where you are and just avoiding things. Right? You can see how that can play out. And so when you turn all of that thinking about how do I deal with this bad thing and turn it into a story in space and time and with images and magical things and all that kind of stuff, it sticks with you and you can actually get through it more easily. And that business of like storytelling and as if and using metaphors, all of that stuff is in most of our psychological theories that we use for therapy.
Hmm. Hmm. Fascinating. Okay, so obviously we're fans of fantasy and we're making some big claims for fantasy that
Hmm.
it can do all this, that it can be helpful and therapeutic and all of that. And um, I would suggest that you can do this in other kinds of literature too. But what you were talking about earlier, that dream logic thing, it seems to me that fantasy embraces that more than other genres. That you can pull that off in fantasy more easily. Yes, certainly you can have magic realism where there's a similar thing going on, or even maybe in some science fiction. Like I'm reading a great series right now, Sun Eater by Christopher Rocchio. Boy, talk about trauma. The main character, Hadrian, goes through it. I mean, I would put him up there with certainly Fitz and from of the Elderlings in terms of all the stuff he goes through. And it affects him. What I love about Rocchio's writing is that this stuff happens to him and it changes him and it makes it so that you can understand the series. Like the first thing you know about the series, page one, it's called Sun Eater. The guy has blown up a sun and killed millions of the enemy, but also a lot of people along with it. And
Mm.
that's the first thing you know about him, is that he has done this atrocious act,
Yeah.
this thing. And as you read the series, you can see the things that happen to him that bring him to a place where he could become that person who does that thing, right? And you're not sure, is this a good thing or a bad thing that he's done, because as you read the series, you realize that the enemy he was trying to go after there it's another species out in the galaxy that is competing with humans to be the apex predator, essentially. They're called the Cielson, and they're vicious, and so yeah, I mean it's a fascinating series, but you can see Hadrian, the main character, changing in the course of it all, and not
Mm.
always for the better.
Right.
Because he has some terrible losses, and some of them make him. I mean, he can be a Mr. Cranky Pants sometimes. I mean, he, and again, he does some. I mean, the example that you see right on page one is where obviously that the whole series is then leading up to that moment in a sense,
Hmm.
and you think, okay, how do you get to be there?
Mm.
But it's so. I guess what I was asking originally is fantasy's not the only form of storytelling that can do this, right?
Mm. Oh, of course.
Do you
Yeah.
think it's the best at it though? I mean, I want to claim that, but what do you?
Well, I think that the thing about fantasy is okay. So if you make the parallel that I do with dreaming, most dreams are actually pretty mundane. Actually, if you
Uh-huh.
look across it, been a lot of literature on dreams over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And we often talk about how bizarre they are and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at like actual dream content reports and laboratory studies and all that kind of stuff, it's usually
Yeah.
just regular stuff happening to regular people. There's no violations of the laws of physics or any of that kind of jazz. So
Yeah.
clearly, yes, absolutely, you can process all kinds of emotional stuff without using fantastical examples. But it's just that the brain is not limited to that, and so it won't abide by any sort of strictures if that's not what you need at the
Yeah.
time. If you
Yeah.
need to process the trauma as if you're being chased by giant, werewolves or whatever, then that's what you're going to see, or
Yeah.
evil clowns, or Godzilla or whatever it is. If that's what depicts your emotions better, then that's what it's going to go for.
Okay.
So, but to get back to your question, I think absolutely yes. It's just a matter of like what is needing to be processed here. So if the focus of your story, say, is on repairing relationships, and you can do that without resorting to fantastical imagery, then you've got a great story on your hands that'll work just fine.
Yeah.
The original, I think Terry Pratchett was talked about this, how the original genre was fantasy, and I think that's true. Everything else just sort of grew out of that, but
Yeah.
it grew out of it from a desire to say, I'm going to tell a fantasy story, but without the fantasy wildness, so that it's more realistic. And I think that desire for quote realism unquote is probably a more modern phenomenon.
Yeah.
As science has progressed and all of this kind of stuff, then you had the explosion of all these other genres that say, I want to tell a story, but I don't want to use any magical stuff.
Huh.
And if you know what you're doing, of course, you can do a great job of that. There's lots of fantastic stories like that. But to me, it's just like, why? When why when you can use monsters and
When you can
magic.
have dragons, right?
Why would you do that if you could have dragons? Like, come
Right.
on.
Right. So sometimes I have a mundane dream, and sometimes I have a dream where a chihuahua on a leash is pulling me along as I'm wearing these frictionless flip-flops, neon blue, by the way, frictionless flip-flops. And I'm like skating. It's like I'm water skiing, and the little chihuahua is pulling me all over the place. I actually had that dream the other day.
Well, we'll talk about it later.
Magical flip-flops, I think, plus a
Yeah.
very strong chihuahua. But it was fun. It was like a flying dream. I love flying dreams, by the way.
Oh yeah, those
Yeah.
are great. Those are
Yeah.
great.
So, yeah.
And that's a good example of the flying dream, universal. Like people, the dreams reported in cultures all over the planet have flying dreams. And I think the way of interpreting that makes the most sense is that it's about freedom, it's about expanding horizons, and that part's pretty straightforward. It's what the details are. Like if you have someone who's flying, but they get up to a certain level and they're afraid and they get
Uh-huh.
into vertical, then they come back down, then you're thinking, okay, so this person is feeling like they're like Icarus. Like if they fly too high, bad things will happen.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
their experience. And so the dream just says, this is where you're at. It's as if this is happening, you
Yeah.
know?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is again relevant to your story. There's a character who kind of flies later in here, and then there's I won't get into it because that would be spoilery, but
hmm
um,
But
but
you're talking about the magic system. Yes.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Which I feel like we're getting glimpses of here in King of the Forgotten Darkness, right?
hmm Yeah.
So let's talk about magic for a moment too, because I think you touched on something interesting. And I had a discussion the other day with Von Roycroft about magic.
Yeah. Great
And
discussion.
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I thought I enjoyed chatting with him, and he had some really wonderful things to say. And
Mm.
but I want your opinion on whether you feel you mentioned soft versus hard and all of that. And so for myself, I don't even think of what I write in the Adan trilogy. I don't even think of it as a magic system per se.
Yeah.
It's definitely more leaning to the soft side of things, to
Yeah.
use Sanderson's terms for that. And obviously both have their strengths, I suppose. But do you feel that either one works a little better in tandem with what we've been talking about in terms of fantasy stories' ability to be symbolic and to help people in the way that dreams do to
Yeah.
process there? Is the soft magic more conducive to that than the hard magic, which is more almost like a pseudoscience, like you're presenting
hmm
it, like you're explaining it? Does does explaining it away in the sense take away its power to become symbolic? I guess that's what I'm
Mhm.
asking.
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, yeah.
Okay.
That the reason that we use metaphors and symbols is because they are the best way of expressing something that is otherwise very difficult to put into words. And
Uh-huh.
these are impressions and feelings and emotions and even just like basic experiences of the body and all of that. Like I mean, there's reams of poetry out there trying to do the same kind of thing. And what do? They use metaphors. And in a lot of my academic work, I talk about basically what's called embodied cognition theory that gets into why we use metaphors in our thought and like everyday thought. It's just inundated with metaphors. In fact, statement is itself a metaphor, right? Because the concepts don't inundate anything like literally, but you get what I mean. And so in a fantasy story, if you're talking about magic, more often than not, it's talking about the way in which a person exercises their will. It can also express other things like one's essence. I think that's a big part of the way that Tolkien uses it.
Uh-huh.
Magic is the essence of the elves. It's magical and mysterious, and you just
Yeah.
got to accept it. And there's no explaining any of it. So, and leaving that mystery alone is, I think, maybe the what Sanderson is getting at when he talks about a soft system, its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Now, I think I don't remember who it was in that video that you just referenced that pointed out that the hard systems and all of the rules and all that some of that probably evolved out of video games and role-playing games
Yeah.
that have to codify this kind of thing in order for it to work
Yeah, I think
as
that was me. But
yeah,
yeah.
as a game. And I think that's a good point.
Uh-huh.
You really don't need all the different types of allomancy and all that kind of jazz like you see in Mistborn.
Right.
Not that it isn't cool, it is really cool. And the rule of cool is a thing, right? There's
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, what I felt was kind of missing from that was the emotional resonance and the what is this symbolizing? What does this
Uh-huh.
mean?
It makes
It's
it
just
harder for it to function as a symbol, I guess.
yes, it's because it becomes a list of superpowers, basically.
Uh-huh.
Or like you say, it's kind of a science thing where you're explaining how all the mechanisms work.
Right.
Which, it's not that that's bad necessarily. It's not my style. I don't care much for that. Although there are a lot of rules to the magic that I have in my story.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So
You
I'm
have
also,
experience gaming too,
oh
so
yeah, and I actually have developed a board game based on the magical world,
oh
and
cool.
that's too that I'm developing now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been working on it for many years, but I'm now getting to the point where might be able to publish it too. So, I mean, I'm familiar with like coming up with rules for magic and everything. And I
Yeah.
think that Sanderson's explanation is valid in the sense that you want to at least convey that it can't just do anything,
Right.
and that's one great way to do that. There are many others though.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, you say that you have some rules for your magic, although I think we just basically get an introduction in here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that may be something that gets fleshed out further through the series. But I feel like you still have some characters. For the woodsman, for example, comes straight out of a nightmare.
Yeah.
That's I mean, there's some elements in your storytelling that are just very dreamlike, and that's what. In fact, the woodsman literally appears in Liam's dreams.
Yeah. Until he doesn't.
Until yeah, and then elsewhere as well. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so so you're definitely leaning on you're getting the best of both worlds maybe somehow or other. Maybe you can do that.
I tried to strike a balance there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the magic and the characters too, especially the magical characters, the ones that only live in Arantir. They're they're there in some ways for just for whimsy, and I think that I guess some people may or may not like that
Like
element
a
of it,
character
but
like Maple, for example. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Lots of whimsy there. Yeah.
there is, but it's kind of there's a darker undercurrent to it that
Yeah.
is there, but like some people maybe not notice it. I don't know. But like they're also there for very psychological reasons. So
Yeah.
like I was saying before, I'm very um, into the type of depth psychology that deals with like archetypes and narratives and timeless character that kind of stuff.
The Jungian stuff, the Joseph
Exactly.
Campbell type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so when a character appears in a dream, I'm asking myself, if it's not somebody they know, then it's an abstraction of some kind, and it's a element of their own psyche that they're
Hmm.
having a dialogue with. So,
Wow.
say
Huh.
a traumatized war vet, say,
Yeah.
may have a dream where he's got this wounded soldier over here, and over here there's like a commander saying, "You need to take that wounded soldier and throw him off a cliff."
Hmm.
And he'll be stuck in between this, like, is this right? Should I do this? Should I not? Well, what's going on here is that he is at war with himself. On one
Hmm.
hand, he feels wounded. That's the wounded part of himself.
Yeah.
But it's distant enough to where it's, oh, that's not me, right? Because as a military person, you're encouraged to be strong and tough and resilient, and you shouldn't just whine about stuff, right? You need to suck it up,
Right.
right? I even have a patch that says "Embrace the suck,"
Wow. Huh. Yeah.
right? Common thing you'll hear in the military. But
Sure.
then the commander is also part of him too. The part of him that says weakness is not tolerated. We'll have none of that. Throw it off a cliff. Get rid of it.
Wow. Wow.
So that's also in this book too. And
Yeah.
I'll let people read it and figure out what. There's elements of this story that come from my own dreams too,
Hmm.
as I was going through therapy and so forth. And let anyone sufficiently clever enough figure out what parts.
Huh. No magical flip-flops that I noticed, though.
No, no, I was free. Unfortunately, I did not have any magical flip-flops. Only the wisest of those have, among us have those.
Yeah, I suppose that must be it.
That's it. True enlightenment comes with slippery flip-flops.
Yep. Or chihuahuas who pull you
And
off.
chihuahuas, yes, right.
Yeah.
You learned that in the mountains of Tibet, right? No doubt.
I'm sure somewhere. Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is brilliant, Eric. I'm just you've produced something special here in this book, and I know it's going to be the beginning of a wonderful series. And you're going to give us how many books in this series, do you think? What's the plan? What's the grand scheme here?
Grand scheme is three trilogies. There's
Three
nine.
trilogies.
Yeah. The middle trilogy, most of it's already written.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so, I mean, I have been working on these for a long time. And you mentioned the magic, like you learn a whole lot more about that in book four. So I'll
Okay.
just throw that out there. Book
Okay.
two is finished and is being looked at by publishers, and now I'm writing book three. So
Okay.
yeah,
What's the best way for people to get a hold of King of the Forgotten Darkness?
the easiest way would be to go to ericgoodwyn.com and then just click on the fiction tab, and it pops right up. And
I'll
then you
put a
can,
link to your website in
yeah.
the description, and it's available so far. It's not. Is it available as an audiobook yet,
Oh,
or
I wish.
yeah? Okay,
No, it's not.
we got to get that audiobook out. Yeah.
Yes, I know. I get lots of requests for that. It's like, dude, I published this through a small press, Roundfire Press, which is part of Collective Inc. And they have informed me that that is their choice to decide when and how that is done. So,
Okay. Okay.
okay, boss, whatever you say, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that.
Pros and cons, I
Pros
guess.
and cons. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, I appreciate your time, Eric. This has been a great discussion. Your insights are always so interesting and helpful. And I always come away with a larger sense of how important this genre is, really, when I chat with you. I've always believed that fantasy is important. Storytelling is important. That we're actually doing. It's not. I mean, it's sure it's great as escape too. That's wonderful. But we're
Hmm.
also doing some really important things as writers and as readers. We're processing
Hmm.
things that are relevant to our lives. We can emerge from stories with a better sense of ourselves and the things that we've gone through and our relationships even. Maybe seeing characters go through process their trauma and heal their relationships can be helpful for us in our lives as well. Really appreciate what you do a lot.
Thank you.
It's great to have stories written by someone with such insights. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. At some point, we'll have to talk about active imagination. It's a technique that you use in therapy that essentially allows a person to go into a dream while they're still in awake and in session with you. It's very dreamlike and very fantasy novel-ish.
Wow, very
Oh yeah.
cool. Yeah, we'll have that discussion and
All
many
right.
more in the future. But for
I hope
that,
so.
oh, that's going to be it. But thank you everybody for watching, and until next time.